This might be the final one where I'm wearing a coat and tie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it going to be as exciting as our 100th episode? It was like, that's our 100th episode. All right.
All right, so welcome to episode 103 of Farm to Markets. This is a show where participants only get 5 minutes to state their opinion. The person with the most time at the end wins, but there are no prizes. Today we were talking about economic models, buying equal-weighted funds, bank stocks, Shohei Ohtani, and lab-grown coffee. So Neil Record of the Telegraph, who writes for like an English newspaper called the Telegraph, basically spent 40 years creating economic models for the Bank of England. And after 40 years, Neil basically says that he doesn't trust economic models. So he's been doing it for 40 years. Decided that all the inputs and stuff that they put in them to give them some sort of predictive power don't actually predict anything that they would want them to. What are your thoughts on economic models, and do you think do you distrust them as much as Neil does?
I don't think I distrust them as much as he's come to, but I would also say don't put too much stock in specific predictions either. The way I kind of look at it is like this. Let's say you have a really big cruise ship and you've got a bridge crew and passengers, and there's crew on the shore, and there's a starting point and a destination point. And if everybody kind of agrees on where the ship wants to go, at any given time, you can kind of predict where the ship is going to be and what it's going to be doing, and all that kind of stuff. You may not be able to predict the weather that the cruise is going to have, or what another ship might do, or if there's some kind of an accident or a mechanical fault with the ship. But all the main points in time, you can kind of predict where the ship is going to be. I don't really think that you can look at, extremely specific economic predictions 20 years out and put any real stock in it. But if, say, like policymakers and central bankers and big business and the financial system and the general public all kind of agree on policy and where they want to go with things, I think 5 to 10 years out, you can make relatively broad assumptions about what the economy would look like. But, again, you can't really account for like maybe a meteor hits the earth 2 years from now and all of a sudden there is no economy. So, and to an extent, I think economic models are useful if everybody's kind of on the same page and there's not a whole lot of serious change going on in the world. But the more granular you try to get with it, the further out you go, the less useful they really are.
I guess I'm not as negative as the author was. It seems like those 40 years were not so good to him. But I tend to agree with his overall view towards economic models in their place with policymaking. The main points the author made were it's good to be skeptical towards model forecasts. And also, the more complex the system, the more limited the predictive power of the model becomes. And also, models are often biased towards the interest of the model creator. So all of those points I agreed with. Basically, I see them as a tool for economists, for policymakers, for large institutions, and even investors to some degree. But they're not oracles. There are way too many unknown variables to fully rely on them. But it's not like they're completely unnecessary. When you have to make big decisions with limited information, they can certainly help strengthen the position of that decision maker. Economic models it's kind of predicting the outcome of college basketball, like in March Madness. You can gather all the stats on the players, the coaches, the team performance, the win and loss momentum. I read there's even a metric called the BPI, or the Basketball Power Index, and they factor in things like potential injuries and game locations. And it gives you all the information you need to accurately predict what's going to happen. But they rarely actually accurately predict the winning team. So in the end, they can aid for decision making, but they're certainly not the oracles.
I'm exactly as cynical as the author of this particular story. We have this conversation about every 90 days, about economists accurately predicting 7 of the last 5 recessions. We all tongue in cheek, but the reality is that these forecasts essentially they're an alternative to just following the basic principles of financial life. So we say people buy portfolios that are appropriate for you. And these economic forecasts are saying, except when we predict this, and then you should act according to our predictions. And when you do, you would have been better served just to have followed the recipe that we've been telling our clients for the last 30 years. So I'm really cynical about this. I think economists are just much better at talking out of their tailpipes than the average American, and their persuasive skills of we can tell you when it's going to rain and when it's going to be sunshiny is much more persuasive than the accuracy of their actual forecasts.
So following that, I am not as cynical because kind of like Drew said, it's somewhat of a benchmark. And if financial planning is basically just economic modeling, it's just personal economic modeling. So, and while we have no idea what's going to happen, it gives you something to shoot for, and it gives you a criteria or a list of reasons like why you made a decision. So if we, and for a lot of people, if, let's just say we do nothing, it's like we save the same amount of money and, we get the same amount of inflation in 25 years, you're going to end up here. And that's a pretty, that's a pretty important piece of information for people to consider, is that if we do nothing different, you're going to look like this in 25 years. Now, we know that there's a lot of things that could happen, but let's just say for a second that it doesn't. Here's where you're going to be. And then you can adjust your life based on whether that's good or bad. And it gives you something to start making decisions based on. And then, of course, things are going to happen. You can adjust the model as you get closer and closer to retirement or financial independence or whatever you want to call it. But it gives you it's a good jumping off point to say is that if nothing else changes, you're going to be here. Is that a good or bad thing? Now, the bigger the model, obviously, the less predictive it is. But I understand why big banks do them. Is that if we're going to allocate resources to certain areas, we would like at least some reason for why we did it. And then this way they can say if inflation's this, if all of these things line up, we think this is going to happen. And then that's why we made like X decision. Like, you have to be careful though. Like, as like bigger companies, you probably want to just assume that you don't know anything. But if they need reasons why they do stuff, you can use an economic model to do it. But I think in especially personal, financial planning, I think they're incredibly useful for at least, setting up some sort of goalpost of where you are now and where you might be 20 years from now. So I'm not as cynical, but I'm more for it on a personal level than I am on the broader economy, mostly because there's less inputs on a personal level. Just like when engineers know exactly how a plane's going to perform, how the air is going to flow over the wing. Thankfully for physics, physics doesn't change that often, but there's also less inputs that they have to consider. So, but I think on a personal level, modeling your future is actually pretty helpful. I also do financial planning for a living, so I might be biased.
What was the name of those 2 banks that listened to their economic forecasts and went bankrupt and had to get bailed out by the FDIC?
Silicon Valley, the Signature.
Yeah, exactly.
But they didn't though. I mean, I think every economic model was look, at some point interest rates are going to go up. And what they were thinking is we think we're going to skirt the system here and try and get as much yield as we can before interest rates go out or before interest rates go up. So I don't think any economic model is interest rates are just going to stay the same for an indefinite amount of time. I mean, I think they were just being too risky. They just took on too risk and didn't assume it would happen as soon as it did. But I don't know if anybody's economic model that was we're not going to raise rates at some point in the future. Let's see here. Okay, so this was from a website that I read from time to time called Advisor Perspectives, and basically there's this Marion Webb who had the idea that if people think the market is currently overweight or the market is up too high, it's up 20% or something for the year of the S&P 500. One solution would be to buy equal weighted index funds. So if you buy the iShares S&P 500, the S&P 500 index is capitalization weighted, meaning that the bigger companies, will have a bigger impact on if that fund goes up or down. And what this person's saying is that if you buy the equal weighted index, that you're less likely to experience you're less likely to buy overweighted stocks, and this would be a solution if you think the market is too high. What do you think about Miriam's idea of buying equal weighted indexes?
Yeah, so we've talked about what's going on with the market a decent amount this year, and I think I can't remember what the number is now, but until the last few weeks, it's basically been maybe a half a dozen stocks that have driven almost all the performance of the S&P 500 for the year. More has come up a little bit and helped out recently, but really, I guess what she's saying is, do you believe companies like Apple and Google and a few others like that are overvalued at the moment? And if so, basically buy the market equally weighted, so that when those companies eventually go down, you won't lose nearly as much money. I don't really have any problem with that. I mean, I think that it really depends on your goal. You know, if you want to buy an index fund that is going to take into account, you know, a half dozen to a dozen stocks that are going crazy and make you more money, then you can buy a capitalization weighted fund. And if you really don't want to do that, if you want to, you know, sacrifice potentially some upside for, you know, loss protection, then go with an equal weighted one, because at that point you're making a broader bet, for lack of a better term, that the whole market is either going to go up or go down versus, you know, a handful of companies are going to go up or go down. So really, I guess it just depends on what your goal and how much risk you're willing to take with a handful of companies driving your performance both up or down.
I don't really have a problem with how the author explained the different funds and their different strategies and how it works, but I do have a problem with kind of like the underlying tones of this article. It had the Dunning-Kruger effect written all over. It's like you don't know what you don't know. And it almost seems like the article was written for like a do-it-yourself investor who felt like they got duped into thinking they had the whole investment package figured out by owning the MSCI World Index Fund. And it talked about some the diversification concerns by owning the MSCI World Index, because, you know, although you think that it's equally diversified across the entire stock market, it's not. It's stacked with US equities, which are also cap weighted, meaning that the bigger they are, the more representation they have. They only have a few foreign positions, and they exclude a lot of countries, including emerging markets. But then it unveiled, you know, the true winning strategy of owning this equal weighted MSCI World Index fund. And now you're free from the chains of momentum, and you can buy value, and you don't have to worry about it ever again. So for the individual that's a do-it-yourselfer that's getting their advice from these kind of articles, I would recommend seeing an investment advisor, you know, someone who has a deep understanding of all the investment products, and they can build you a portfolio based on your needs, based on your goals, based on your objectives, instead of just doing a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
For the last 30 years, about every couple of years, I have a client comes in clutching a investment newsletter that's given them all the inside tricks for getting 100 and 200% returns on their money. And in a moment of weakness, sometimes we'll say, okay, we'll actually implement this particular strategy for you, only to watch that our own model portfolios did way better than these newsletters. Until we start seeing these equal weighted ETFs show up in the thrift savings program, or for the pension programs of large pension plans, or for S&P 500. If they can compete to the same level as the S&P 500 index for passive investors who just put money in every month like clockwork, they're never going to do as well as these other things. Don't fight nature. The fact of the matter is that the system is set up that where the current system, when everybody's buying, they're going to be buying the S&P 500, and when they sell, everybody's going to be selling the S&P 500. If this particular strategy did so much better than some of these other benchmarks, we'd be in them because we follow a momentum, system. But so far, when we tried to diversify to have so much in value and so much in growth, we got stung pretty bad. So we jettisoned that idea because it wasn't as good as what we're doing right now.
I thought it was a neat idea. The equal weighted index funds have been fun to watch because it gives you an idea of like what, it gives you an interesting idea of like how everything moved. If everything was equal, how everything was, obviously, because they're called equal weighted, and they've been fun to watch. But it's kind of like when you get those, you go to like those like novelty stores where they have your mug looks like like Captain Picard or something like that. You're like, okay, I can see how somebody might like that, but you'd never buy it. That's kind of what the equal weighted funds are. It's like, yeah, it's one way to do it. But if you've had like a diversified portfolio, you're probably getting about the same returns as like the S&P 500 equal weighted fund. And what you can expect is that if the market goes up, you're not going to go up as much, and then if the market goes down, you're not going to go down as much. So it's basically accomplishing the same thing as like a diversified, stock portfolio would be, which you can also replicate with like the all market index or something like that. So certainly a neat idea, and the equal weighted funds have been fun to watch, but I don't know that it actually implemented as a legitimate strategy.
Do you think people that actually adopted this strategy, the do-it-yourselfer, do you actually think they felt duped? That that it wasn't like an equal spread across the entire world.
Like you bought an S&P 500 fund, and you're like, wait, they're not equal weighted. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it sounded like like if you own the the MSCI World Index Fund, you're actually not diversified. Well, it's like, no, duh, you should have known that already if you did your due diligence. It's like I don't try to calculate the the chemicals of anesthesia when I'm going into surgery. That's I don't know. It just seemed like.
Yeah,
you should have known that before getting.
I think for the do-it-yourself investor, I think like one of the first things you click on is like what's in the portfolio, because like I just feel like that's everybody's thing, is that when you look at the index, the first thing you look at is what the heck's in here, and then I think the first thing most people realize is that it's mostly in Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. So I don't think anybody was that shocked when they learned that the MSCI World Index had a majority of U.S. stocks in it. The name is certainly misleading because it makes you think like it's diversified across all the countries. Well, technically it is, but the majority of it's in U.S. stocks. But I don't know. I think the average do-it-yourself investor, I think like the first thing people do is look at what's in it. So I don't think they were that surprised. Okay, so. The S&P 500, the S&P 500 Global, which is basically just market commentary, is shown as that most people know is that bank stocks have basically rallied over the last 4 months. And from a number of articles, including like CNBC and like other like Bloomberg, other financial markets, says that that having bank stocks reaching their 4-month high is extremely good news for the market. What do you think about bank stocks' recent rally?
Well, the prompt you gave us was, is it good news for the economy? And I'm not so sure that it is. I talked to, in a recent video that Deutsche Bank and a handful of other big financial firms foresee the reason for the rate cuts that the Federal Reserve is now starting to forecast themselves as a slowing economy, possibly recession. So if they're going to have to cut rates, that's not necessarily a good sign for the broader economy if the economy is slowing down and so they're cutting rates in response. But it is good for bank stocks. If you don't know, banks make money basically by lending money in one of two ways, either origination fees or through interest. Some banks keep their own loans on the books. Some of them just sell them. But if interest rates come down, that means they're making more loans. More loans mean more fees, more loans means more interest. So it's probably good news for banks in that more people will borrow money from them and pay them fees. I don't know if it's necessarily great news for the economy.
I think it's good for the overall financial stability in the economy. It's great that bank stocks are up. Mostly they're just recouping a lot of their losses for the past year or two. I mean, they got hammered when interest rates started rising, many months ago. A lot of them had to sell long-term assets at a loss. I mean, we talked about this earlier. Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank failed, and a lot of banks were flirting with failure. But now that things are looking better, they're up. They're doing well, but it's not like they're just knocking the leather off the ball, year over year. They're just recouping some of their losses. They had a lot more ground to make up. So overall, I think it's a good thing. There's a lot of market breadth to it. It's not like financials are just doing well and everything's doing crummy. All the sectors are doing decent right now. So I think overall that's a good thing.
A lot of people don't believe it, but banks essentially make money when their customers make money, and they lose money when their customers are losing money. And if the economy is strong, banks will be doing strong. The Fed is signaling that they're going to take their foot off the brake, which means that the economy will be allowed to accelerate at faster speeds than it's been allowed for the last 2 to 3 years. As a result, the value of bank stocks is a harbinger of what is being predicted. So if you take your foot off the brake and allow the economy to accelerate, that means the customers of banks should do better. And if the customers of banks are doing better, then banks should do better. I think that's what you read into these tea leaves.
Is that what the models predicted?
Yeah.
Exactly. Good one. Yes. No, I agree. Is that if, especially in this economy, whereas that in March, everybody was concerned that, there was going to be like banking collapse because the Fed was hiking interest rates. The fact that bank stocks are doing good basically means that, inflation's cooling closer to the Federal Reserve's target, and they're going to, as predicted today, the Federal Reserve is thinking that they might do at least 3 cuts next year and then hold rates steady. So for any bank that was like, we can't handle another rate hike, that's extremely good news. And for anybody that's got their money in the bank, that's also good news. And I think in turn that, that's basically good for the economy. Whether that works out, longer term or not, I don't know. But I think in the near term, that's absolutely good news for the market. And it's also good news because it means like the economy is not going to overheat itself, supposedly according to their model. So that's what I think. Okay, and I lost. Where'd it go? Okay, so so for people that follow baseball, and I guess for people that don't, is that on Saturday, Shohei Ohtani agreed to who's a baseball player that played for the Anaheim Angels. I have no idea how many years, but supposedly he's like the best or like one of the better players in baseball. And his contract's finally up. He's a free agent, so a lot of teams, he's very highly sought after. But on Saturday, he agreed to a blockbuster 10-year deal with the Los Angeles Dodgers that'll pay him $700 million in total, which is the largest contract in U.S. sports history, and they'll pay it to him over a 10-year period. So, but the thing that's interesting about, so not only is he getting paid $700 million, which is interesting in itself because that's a ton of money, even over 10 years, is that what he's going to do is that he structured the deal so that he's going to defer $68 million per season. And so he's only going to make $2 million in actual money per season, and then defer all of it till the end of his contract, which will be in like about 2043. And the idea is that what he was thinking is that he's probably going to be maybe not living in Los Angeles when he realizes the majority of that money. What do you think about Shohei Ohtani's deal making structure with the Dodgers?
Well, this is not the first contract like it, but it is by far the most absurd example of it. There's 13 other players in Major League Baseball. Some of them have been retired for like 10, 15 years who are still getting paid on similar contracts like this. Most of them are making a few $100,000 to a couple million a year. This one's going to be like, I think it's 80-90% of his contract isn't going to be paid to him while he's a player for the Dodgers. He didn't break any rules, so I can't imagine MLB is going to step in and void the deal, but I can envision after this a quote unquote Ohtani rule being put in place where maybe certain percentages at most can be deferred this long. Because it's kind of a blatant violation of the spirit of the luxury tax, if not the actual letter of the law, for competitive balance in Major League Baseball. So I can't imagine MLB wants to continue doing this, but I don't think they're going to do anything about
it. I'd rather that this player keep his money than give it to Gavin Newsom, over the next 10 years. So I think that's a win. I am concerned that the article mentioned that it's not it's not inflation adjusted. So I think the actual value of his 700 million in 2043 is going to be like 460 million. Now, it sounds like he has a whole team of wealth advisors in his corner that helped him draft this contract. So it sounds like it's going to be a good deal for him. It's really interesting. I think he knows what he's doing, but he's going to have to learn to live on $2 million a year and get through that next 10 years. I guess it did say he makes a lot from other things, so he's probably doing just fine. He probably knows what he's doing.
I think it's a prudent move. What the article doesn't reflect is the risk for doing so. Is that when you defer your income like this, the income that he doesn't receive is actually the property of the Los Angeles Dodgers. So for one reason or another, if the Los Angeles Dodgers takes the money they didn't pay Ohtani and use it to leverage to go buy other players someplace else, and they end up losing a bunch of money, and they end up filing for bankruptcy protection, it's quite frankly that he could lose several $100 million as a result of it. So it's not without risk that he's making these strategies. So, but hey, if Los Angeles Dodgers are here 10 years from now, he'll look like a pretty smart guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read that he makes like 43 million in what do you call them, like through like advertisements and stuff like that, like per year. So he's not, he'll make it just fine by deferring the income. Either way, like when you're making this much money, you're going to get obliterated in taxes, like no matter like where you are. But if he retires in Florida or Texas or something like that, it'll be less. I mean, pretty much anywhere except if he retires anywhere except for like California or New York, it's going to be less. But if he does end up in like Florida or Texas, you are going to save quite a bit in at least in state income taxes. So yeah, it's like good deal. Like Joe said, there is some risk, but when you're making 43 million, per year, aside from the extra 2 million that you're going to be making from your actual baseball contract, you're going to be just fine. All right. So the last question is that apparently, we've talked about like lab grown meats and stuff like that on the show before, but now there's also lab grown coffee, and I know Joe's answer. So we know that, but for people who actually drink coffee, like how would you feel if you found out that your cup of coffee was actually grown in a lab versus on, in Colombia or whatever they get it from?
I'm empty, so I don't know if I can talk. So
Yeah. All right. I don't really have a problem with this. If the coffee is grown in a lab, it tastes the same. It quacks the same. I'm all for it. It doesn't really bother me.
I'm not old enough to drink lab-grown coffee, so I'll just go ahead and move on to Tom's comments.
Yeah, that comment could have been easily predicted with any economic model. So
100%.
Not many inputs, but I don't know. It depends, because I've heard like bad things about decaf coffee. It's not grown in a lab, but apparently they process it a lot, where they use a lot of chemicals to extract the caffeine in it. So I guess I want to know more about the lab growing process, like how many chemicals, and then like see other people drink it for like maybe 5 years, and then maybe I'll enjoy a cup of lab grown coffee. But until then, I think I'll just stick with the real stuff. I like where they're going, sustainable, having coffee, so we don't ever run out of coffee, which is probably a good thing. But I'd like it to be thoroughly tested before I enjoy a cup of lab grown coffee.
Well, you're quite the risk manager there, Tom. You probably use oven mitts to drink your hot coffee to protect yourself from getting burnt. So
yeah, I keep my oven mitts right next to my pristine cast iron pan.
I was about to say you also use soap on your cast iron pan.
Yeah, I haven't gotten stick, and the eggs, regardless of my soap usage, the eggs that I cook on it in the mornings do not stick at all. So it's been nice. Yeah, so you should try it. All right, well that's it for episode 103 of Farm to Markets. We'll see you next week.